Imagine this. You're told the era of endless wars is finally over. You voted for a promise to bring our troops home, to put America first, and to stop spending trillions in the sands of the Middle East. But then, you wake up to news of aircraft carriers rushing to the Persian Gulf, B 52 bombers on standby, and whispers of a conflict that could dwarf anything we saw in Iraq or Afghanistan. This is the Imperial Trap, a term coined by Fareed Zakaria to describe the dangerous cycle the US finds itself in today. We want to leave, yet we find ourselves being pulled back into the vortex of the Middle East. Why is it that the more we try to squeeze our adversaries with maximum pressure, the closer we get to a full-scale Iran-Israel war? Are we sleepwalking into another disaster, or is there a calculated reason why Israel and the West are bracing for impact? Tonight, we're stripping away the political spin to look at the cold, hard reality of the brewing storm between Israel and Iran. Is Washington's strategy a masterstroke of deterrence, or are we just setting the stage for a tragedy we promise to never repeat? To understand why we are on the brink, we have to look at the massive contradiction sitting right in the Oval Office. On one hand, you have a president who campaigned on the promise of America first, a doctrine built on the idea that the US should stop being the world's policeman and bring our sons and daughters home from stupid, endless wars. It was a message that resonated with millions of Americans tired of seeing trillions of dollars vanish into the desert while our own infrastructure crumbled. But on the other hand, the administration pivoted toward a maximum pressure campaign against Tehran. By unilaterally withdrawing from the 2015 nuclear deal, JCPOA, and slapping the most soul-crushing economic sanctions in history on the Iranian regime, the US effectively backed a cornered animal into a wall. The logic was simple: starve the regime of cash and they will crawl back to the negotiating table to sign a better deal that addresses their ballistic missiles and regional proxies. However, as Fareed Zakaria pointed out, this is exactly where the imperial trap snaps shut. When you destroy a country's economy but offer no clear, realistic diplomatic off-ramp, you don't get a surrender. You get a cornered adversary who decides that if they can't export oil, no one will. This isn't just a policy debate in a Washington think tank. It has real-world consequences for every American family. As Iran felt the noose tighten, they didn't just sit back. They began to lash out, targeting global energy supply lines and raising the stakes for Israel. Suddenly, the very administration that wanted to pull troops out of the Middle East found itself forced to send more troops, more carrier strike groups, and more missile defense systems to the region to protect our interests and allies. We are witnessing a strategic paradox. The harder we try to force a regime change or a total capitulation through economic means, the more we are sucked back into a military quagmire. The shadow of an Iran-Israel war began to loom larger not because of a grand plan, but because of a series of escalations that neither side seemed able to stop. It raises a haunting question for every veteran and taxpayer. Are we accidentally building a bridge to a war we said we never wanted to fight again? As the economic pressure from the US tightened like a noose, the conflict shifted from bank accounts in Washington to the turquoise waters of the Persian Gulf. This is where the imperial trap turned from a political theory into a literal powder keg. The world watched in shock as mysterious explosions rocked international oil tankers, the lifeblood of the global economy, right at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz. For the American public, these images were a haunting déjà vu. We've seen this script before. The accusations flew. Washington pointed the finger at Tehran's Revolutionary Guard, while Iran denied everything, calling it a false flag to justify an American invasion. But the tension reached a breaking point when Iran did something they couldn't deny. They shot down a US Global Hawk drone, a massive $130 million piece of American technology, claiming it violated their airspace. Suddenly, we weren't just talking about sanctions anymore. We were minutes away from a hot war. President Trump famously revealed he was cocked and loaded for a retaliatory strike, only to pull back at the last second because of the projected loss of life. It was a moment of profound hesitation that exposed the deep cracks in American strategy. But here's what really worried the experts. The US found itself uncharacteristically alone. When Washington tried to build a maritime security construct to patrol the strait, our traditional European allies, France, Germany, the UK, hesitated. They weren't just being difficult. They were terrified. They saw the withdrawal from the nuclear deal as a self-inflicted wound by the Americans, and they had no desire to be dragged into an Iran-Israel war triggered by a policy they didn't support. This lack of international unity sent a dangerous signal. While Israel remained our steadfast partner, the rest of the world began to treat the Israel-Iran rivalry as a ticking time bomb they didn't want to touch. For Americans at home, the question became even more urgent. If we are the world's superpower, why do our oldest friends refuse to stand by us in this fight? Are we leading a coalition, or are we sleepwalking into a massive conflict with no backup and no exit strategy? While the tankers burned in the Gulf, an even more intense battle was being fought behind the closed doors of the West Wing. This wasn't just a policy debate, it was a clash of two fundamentally different American worldviews. On one side, you had the ultimate hawk, National Security Advisor John Bolton. For decades, Bolton had been the leading voice for regime change in Tehran, believing that the only way to secure the US was to dismantle the Iranian government once and for all. He saw the maximum pressure campaign not as a tool for negotiation, but as a fuse for a revolution. But on the other side was a president who had built his political brand on ending forever wars. This created a dangerous incoherence in American foreign policy. While Bolton was pushing for a massive military buildup, the commander-in-chief was tweeting about his desire to sit down for a burger and a chat with Iranian leadership. This mixed messaging sent a signal of weakness and confusion to our adversaries. It made the prospect of an Iran-Israel war more likely, not because anyone wanted it, but because Tehran couldn't tell if the US was planning an invasion or an invitation to a summit. For the American public, this internal chaos was a red flag. We started asking the hard questions. If we go to war with Iran, what is the endgame? We remember 2003. We remember the promises of mission accomplished in Iraq, only to spend the next 2 decades losing thousands of brave men and women and trillions of taxpayer dollars in a sectarian desert war. Experts warned that a conflict with Iran would make the Iraq war look like a walk in the park. Iran is a country with 3 times the population of Iraq, a vastly more sophisticated military, and a landscape of rugged mountains that would be a nightmare for any invading force. When we look at the Israel-Iran shadow war, we have to realize that American lives are on the line in every base across the Middle East. If the Imperial Trap snaps shut, it won't be the politicians in Washington who pay the price. It will be the families in Ohio, Florida, and Texas. We are staring down the barrel of a conflict that could bankrupt our treasury and scar another generation of American soldiers. Is the goal to stop a nuclear weapon, or are we being led into a trap by leaders who have forgotten the lessons of our own history? From the living rooms of Middle America to the briefing rooms in the Pentagon, one question hangs heavy in the air. Are American troops in danger? It's a question that hits home every time a headline flashes another escalation between Israel and Iran. For a generation that has watched the U.S. spend its blood and treasure in the Middle East with little to show for it, the fear of a new, great power conflict is no longer a plot for a Hollywood thriller. It's a terrifying possibility. As we look at the map, we see our soldiers stationed in Iraq, Syria, and across the Gulf sitting directly in the crosshairs of Iranian proxies. If a full-scale Iran-Israel war breaks out, these bases won't just be strategic outposts, they will be targets. The American public is starting to realize that maximum pressure isn't just a phrase on a teleprompter, it's a high-stakes gamble with the lives of our service members. We are forced to ask, is the defense of a specific policy worth the risk of a regional conflagration that could pull us into a third world war? Furthermore, the world is no longer unipolar. While the US maneuvers its carrier strike groups, we see Russia and China watching from the sidelines, ready to fill the vacuum if we overextend
Dầu khó
ourselves
có thể
once
được
again.
bảo vệ an toàn tuyệt đối
Every
trong một
billion
vùng biển
dollars we
đầy
pour into a potential conflict in the Middle East
bởi
is a
những đối
billion
thủ ngang
dollars
tầm.
we aren't using to
Tương
compete
lai
with
của
rising
vùng vịnh và eo
superpowers or
biển
to fix
Hormuz
our own
sẽ
borders
phụ
and
không chỉ là
economy.
một con
The
số ấn
American
tượng về
taxpayer
mặt
is
thống kê,
tired.
mà
We
nó
are
còn là
tired
một
of
bài
being
toán
told that
phối hợp
every
cực
crisis
tẩu.
thousands of miles away is
Kể
an
từ khi cuộc
existential
chiến nổ
threat
ra
to
vào
our
ngày
way of
20
life. We support Israel, our strongest democratic ally in the region, but we also remember the weight of the caskets returning to Dover Air Force Base.
dịch trả đũa
The
này.
Imperial
Tại
Trap
Lebanon,
isn't just
thủ
about
đô
military
Beirut giờ đây
strategy,
chẳng khác
it's
nào
about
một
the
thành
soul
phố
of
ma
our nation.
dưới các đợt
Can
không
we
kích
still
dồn dập,
avoid a
trong khi
catastrophe,
phía Nga
or
lại
has the
kiên quyết
momentum
từ
of
chối đến Mỹ
escalation
để đàm
already
phán.
taken the wheel?
Theo lời ông
The world
Zelensky,
is watching
nếu
to
Mỹ
see
có
if
thể
America
nới
will
lỏng
lead
trừng
with
phạt
wisdom or
để
be
dầu mỏ
dragged into the
Venezuela
abyss
quay
by
trở
its
lại
own
thị trường,
contradictions.
đó sẽ là một
As we
dưới
stand at
sự
this
giám sát
crossroads, the biggest question remains unanswered. What is the endgame? History has shown us that entering a conflict is easy, but
Quan sát
leaving one
kỹ,
is an
chúng ta
entirely
có thể
different
thấy
story.
một sự thay đổi nhẹ
If the
trong
US
tông giọng
continues
của
down
giới
the
chức.
path of the Imperial Trap, we risk more than just our economy.
Ông
We risk
Shinizo
our standing as a
Kozumi
global
khẳng
leader
định
in the
rằng
lives of
lực
those
lượng
we promise to protect. The standoff between Israel and Iran isn't just a regional dispute. It is a stress
cảnh
test
báo
for
rằng
American
rủi ro
resolve
hiện
and
tại
wisdom.
là quá
Are
lớn
we
và
capable of
các tàu
finding
của
a
sự khổ
diplomatic
cực.
off-ramp, or are we
Dù
destined
sở
to
hữu
repeat
địa
the
điểm khác
cycles of
nhau
the past?
trên khắp lãnh thổ
We've
rộng
seen the
lớn trụ
maximum
vững trước
pressure
sức mạnh
campaign
của
push
siêu
the Middle
cường số
East
1,
to the brink of a
việc giá năng
full-scale
lượng tăng cao
Iran-Israel
không
war,
chỉ hỗ trợ
but
nền
without a
kinh tế
clear
nội
goal,
địa
we are
mà
simply
còn bắt đầu
drifting
nổ
toward a
ra.
storm.
Vai
We
trò
must
của
ask
Nga
ourselves,
trong cuộc chơi
can we
này.
still avoid World War
Moscow
III,
không chỉ
or have
đơn
we
thuần
already
khu vực
crossed the point
thành một
of
vấn
no
đề
return?
toàn cầu mang
The
tính định
decisions
hình
made in
thời
the
đại.
coming months will
Mỹ không
echo
còn là
for
người
decades.
hành trình độ
They will
chính xác
determine
cao.
if our children grow up in a
Trong bối
world
cảnh
of
đó,
relative peace
Trung
or
Quốc
a
cũng,
world consumed
thưa
by
quý
another
vị,
great war
tiêu
in
điểm
the
nóng
desert.
nhất trong những giờ
The
qua
truth
chính là
matters
báo
more than
cáo
the
gây sốc
headlines, and
từ
your
tờ
voice
Thời
matters
báo
more
Tài
than the pundits in Washington. We want to hear from you. Do you believe the US should lead a new coalition, or is it time to truly
Trưởng
put
Liên quân
America
Mỹ,
first and
tướng
step
Dan
back
Kane
from the
đã
brink?
tiết lộ rằng
Comment,
trong
pray
vòng
for
30
peace
ngày
if
trước
you
khi
hope for
những tiếng súng đầu
de-escalation in the Middle East. Subscribe if you believe the truth matters more than headlines and want to stay informed on the real
là
state of
tương
our
lai của
national
chương trình hạt
security.
nhân Iran.
Thank you for
Các
watching
chuyên gia
and stay
tình báo
vigilant.